Every prophecy about Jesus in the Old Testament sat in Scripture for centuries before he was born, and the man who knew them best still missed it. He was a Pharisee. He knew Isaiah, the Psalms, Daniel, by heart, and he walked right past the one they were all pointing to. This is that same thread, traced from Genesis to the cross. Stay until the end. What stopped him changes how you'll read every page after it. Saul of Tarsus was sitting on a stone bench outside the temple courts. A scroll of Isaiah spread open across his knees, and he was furious. Not at the scroll, at the people calling themselves followers of a dead carpenter from Nazareth and saying he was alive. Saul had read every line of this scroll 100 times. He was about to read it 101st. He had no idea, sitting on that bench, that he was holding the very thread that would end his anger and rebuild his whole life from the ground up. It's quiet here in Houston while I put this together, but I don't know what time it is for you right now. Maybe it's a Sunday morning, and you just opened your own Bible and felt exactly as lost as Saul did before any of this clicked for him. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's actually sitting with this material alongside me. Here's what most people miss about Saul's scroll, and about yours. The prophecies inside it are not scattered. They narrow. They begin as a whisper in a garden and end with a man on a donkey, fulfilled to the letter 500 years after it was written down. Every generation of Scripture cuts the list of candidates down further. By the time you reach the New Testament, there is exactly one name left, standing his family, his city, the timing of his death, even the method of execution, all on the page centuries before he was born. That is not coincidence. That is architecture, and Saul was sitting right inside it. So let's go back to where the thread starts. Genesis, right after everything breaks. God speaks first not to Adam, not to Eve, but to the serpent. Genesis chapter 3. Verse 15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Stop here for 1 second. If this was the only line, you had no Gospels, no New Testament, nothing. What would you guess this offspring was? A nation, a philosophy, a long line of good kings. In the Hebrew, the word is Sarah, seed, not a crowd, not a movement, one seed, carrying the whole shape of what it will become while looking like nothing from the outside. God isn't promising an army of saviors. He's promising one person. Wounded, a heel strike is real damage, but landing a fatal blow to the head of the thing that broke everything. Saul had read that verse 100 times and never once let it be about a person standing in front of him. Now the thread starts to narrow, and the first wrong guess shows up almost immediately. Thousands of years pass. God calls a man named Abram out of a city called Ur, renames him Abraham, and says in Genesis chapter 12, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So now you might think the deliverer could be any one of Abraham's descendants. Thousands of candidates. The list just opened wide open. It didn't stay open long. Abraham has 2 sons. Isaac is chosen, not Ishmael. Isaac has twins. Jacob is chosen, not Esau. Jacob has 12 sons. And in Genesis 49, right before he dies, he doesn't bless the firstborn. He points to Judah and says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. The word for tribute there is Shiloh, the one to whom the nations belong. So, here's where we actually stand. Not a nation, not a tribe at random. Judah, specifically. That's it. That's all we know so far. Notice what just happened to the list. Humanity narrowed to one family. One family narrowed to one tribe. The frame is closing. One wrong guess at a time. And every Jew in Saul's lifetime knew it. Whoever this was, he had to come from Judah. Not Benjamin, and Saul knew that one personally, because Benjamin was his own tribe. Not Reuben. Judah. Remember the seed from Genesis. It just got a family address. Some of you watching this grew up in a church where prophecy felt like a trivia quiz instead of something real. I understand that completely. What broke through for me wasn't a sermon. It was the discovery that this text wasn't edited after the fact to make it fit. In 1947, in the Judean desert, a shepherd found a cave full of scrolls. One of them was a complete copy of Isaiah, dated roughly 100 years before Jesus was born. It's sitting in a museum in Jerusalem right now. Every messianic line in it matches word for word what existed before he took his first breath. That is not a small thing. Here's where we are. We know the family. We know the tribe. But a tribe isn't a king, and a king isn't a guarantee of anything beyond a single throne. We're still missing one piece. What happens when this line actually rules? So let's keep going. Several centuries later, God raises a shepherd boy from Bethlehem, from the tribe of Judah, named David. And in 2 Samuel chapter 7, God makes a promise that goes far past David's own son. Your throne shall be established forever, not a dynasty that fades. Forever. The seed has become a kingdom now. And the Psalms start filling in details that should stop you exactly where they stopped me. Psalm 22 opens with words Jesus will say from the cross 1,000 years later, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then it goes further. They have pierced my hands and my feet. They divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots. This is a public execution, described in detail, in a text written before Rome had even invented crucifixion as a punishment. David is writing roughly 1,000 years before that method existed. I have tried to find another explanation for that. I haven't found one that holds up. Saul had sung that psalm in the temple his entire life. He never once connected the pierced hands in the song to the man whose followers he was now arresting. This is where it gets layered. And this is the part most people don't sit with long enough to feel. Isaiah 53 is the most argued over passage in the Hebrew Scriptures, the suffering servant. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows. He was wounded for our transgressions. By his wounds we are healed. He's led like a lamb to the slaughter. He makes his grave with the wicked, and yet he sees the light of life after being cut off from the land of the living, written roughly 700 years before Jesus. And it doesn't read like a poem. It reads like a court document. Here's the layer underneath that one. Isaiah's suffering servant is part of why so many of Saul's own teachers expected two different messiahs, one who suffers, one who reigns, because nobody could find a way to make those fit inside one man. That confusion is exactly what was sitting underneath Saul's anger on that bench. He wasn't rejecting a stranger. He was rejecting a contradiction he had never been shown how to resolve. The Hebrew word for by his wounds is chabura, not a general word for pain, but the specific word for stripe marks left by a whip. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, documents the Roman practice of flogging before crucifixion in detail. Isaiah names exactly those marks, 500 years early. But not everyone agreed on who this was even about. Some of the rabbis in the centuries after Isaiah read the suffering servant as Israel itself, the whole nation personified, suffering in exile on behalf of the world. Others read him as a coming individual, a Messiah who would carry the nation's weight in his own body. That disagreement isn't a flaw in the text. It's the text doing exactly what real prophecy does, staying open just long enough that nobody can force it to mean something convenient before the moment it's meant to land. Saul would have heard both readings argued in the same room, by serious men, and neither one fully satisfied him. That tension sat in him for years before a light on a road answered it for good. Here's what I want you to sit with for a second, because it's easy to fly past this. You have probably had a season where two things you believed about God didn't fit together cleanly: a promise and a disappointment, a prayer and a silence, a verse that sounded one way and a circumstance that looked like the opposite. You are not the first person to carry an unresolved contradiction in your faith and keep walking anyway. Saul carried one for years. It didn't disqualify him. It was actually the exact shape of the question that would later get answered on that road. In a way no commentary in his memory had managed to do. Let's pause and look at where we've been before this gets any heavier. So far, we have four things, and only four. 1. He comes from humanity, the seed. 2. From Abraham's family. 3. From the tribe of Judah. 4. He's a king who suffers, marked by specific wounds. That's the whole list right now. Nothing more. If this study is opening something up for you, this is a good moment to subscribe. The timeline is about to narrow further than most people ever realize, and you don't want to lose the rest of it. Now, before Daniel even says a word, guess with me for a second. If a king is going to come from Judah, suffer in the specific way the Psalms and Isaiah describe, and somehow still reign forever, what's missing from that picture? You'd need a when, a century, at least. Otherwise, this whole thread is just a beautiful pattern with no way to know if it's actually pointing at anyone alive in your lifetime. That's exactly the hole Daniel fills. Daniel, writing in Babylon during the exile, roughly 500 to 600 years before Jesus. In chapter 9, a messenger tells him God has set 70 weeks of years, 490 years, over Jerusalem. The text gives 69 of those weeks, 483 years, counted from the decree to rebuild the city. Documented in Nehemiah and confirmed by Persian records, run that calendar forward, and you land in the window of roughly 26 to 33 AD, right when Jesus of Nazareth is alive. The scholar Harold Hoehner spent years on this calculation in his book On the Chronology of Christ's Life, published by Moody Press in 1977, and landed on the same window other serious scholars across centuries have reached independently. Then Micah, writing around 700 years before Jesus, chapter 5, verse 2, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, not any Bethlehem, the specific one near Jerusalem, in Judah." When Herod later asks his own priests and scribes where the Messiah is supposed to be born, they quote this verse without hesitation. They'd known the address for 700 years. And Zechariah, writing roughly 500 years before the first Palm Sunday, chapter 9, verse 9, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." In John chapter 12, the disciples watch this happen and don't recognize it while it's happening. Only afterward, John writes, do they remember the passage and understand what they had been standing inside. They were watching the prophecy come true and didn't know it yet. Think about what that actually means for you, not just for them. How many times have you stood inside a moment that only made sense looking backward? That's not a failure on your part. That's just where the present moment puts your eyes. The thread isn't broken just because you can't see it bending yet. One more piece before the loop closes. Jeremiah chapter 31. Written during the darkest point of Israel's history, Jerusalem destroyed. The people marched into exile. Into that, God says, "I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers." The Hebrew word is chadash, not refreshed, not updated, genuinely new, written not on stone. God says, but on their hearts. The night before he was crucified, in an upper room, Jesus lifted a cup and said, in Luke chapter 22, verse 20, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." Not a new covenant, the new covenant. The one Jeremiah wrote about 600 years earlier, the seed became a kingdom. The kingdom carried a wound. The wound is now sealed in a cup, passed around a table. Think about someone waiting on a porch for a letter that's been delayed for months. Every day they walk to the mailbox expecting nothing. And every day there is nothing until the not knowing starts to feel like the only thing that's true. Then, one ordinary afternoon, the letter is just there, sitting in the box like it had always belonged there, like the months of silence were never really empty at all. They were just the part of the story that happens before the part. You can see, that's what 400 years of silence between the last prophet and the manger looked like from the inside. Silence that wasn't actually silence. A letter already on its way the whole time. Now back to Saul, because this is where the loop closes for him. And for you, sometime after that upper room, Saul is walking the road to Damascus, still angry, still certain, when a light stops him in the middle of the day and a voice asks him a question he never expected to hear. Saul, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He's blinded, not metaphorically physically blind, for 3 days, in a stranger's house, unable to do anything but sit with everything he thought he knew. A man named Ananias is sent to lay hands on him, and Saul's sight comes back. And the first thing he does after that is start reading the same scrolls completely differently. He didn't get new information. He got the same Isaiah, the same Psalm 22, the same Genesis read by a man who could finally see what had been on the page the entire time. That is not so different from a man walking the opposite direction out of Jerusalem on the very same set of roads a few years earlier, the day after the crucifixion. His name was Cleopas, defeated. He had believed Jesus was the one this entire thread had been pointing toward, and now Jesus was dead, and the story felt finished. A stranger falls into step beside him and asks what they're discussing, and Cleopas says, with that particular honesty that only comes from real loss, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know what's happened?" And the stranger says, "What things?" He walks with them 7 miles. And then, Luke writes, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, that he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Every piece we've traced today, Moses, the prophets, all of it, it's only when they sit down to eat, when he breaks the bread, that their eyes open and they recognize him. And he's gone. And Cleopas turns to the other man and says, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road?" Their hearts were burning the whole time. They just didn't know what the fire was. Here's what I want to leave you with. 3 things. First, this isn't 300 verses pulled out of context to win an argument. It's one narrowing architecture, the seed in Genesis, the family in Abraham, the tribe in Judah, the kingdom in David, the wounds in the Psalms and Isaiah, the timeline in Daniel, the address in Micah, the entrance in Zechariah, the covenant in Jeremiah, one story, written by one author, over 1,500 years, through dozens of human writers who never met each other. Second, if you're in a season that feels like that road out of Jerusalem, where you believed something and it seemed to collapse, and all you have left to say is we had hoped the disciples didn't recognize the resurrection while they were standing inside it either, that isn't a failure of faith. That's just where grief puts your eyes for a while. The thread wasn't broken. There's a stranger who keeps pace on roads exactly like that one. And maybe the part that stays with me most is this. When Jesus opened the scriptures for Cleopas, he wasn't winning an argument. He was healing a broken heart by showing it the full shape of the story it had been standing inside the whole time. That's what this actually is. Not a debate tool. A healing. Saul didn't get argued into anything on that road to Damascus. He got shown the same thread he'd been holding his whole life. Finally read correctly. You were right to feel like there was more underneath the surface. There has always been. Think about the seed one more time. The one God planted in a single sentence to a serpent. In a garden. Before there was even a nation to carry it. It didn't stay a seed. It became a family. Then, a tribe. Then a kingdom. Then a wound. Then a covenant. Then a cup on a table the night before everything changed. And on a road outside Damascus, it became the thing that finally stopped a furious, brillant, well-read man in his tracks, and turned him into someone who would spend the rest of his life writing letters about the very thread he had once read past 100 times. You're not reading a different Bible than Saul read. You're reading the same one. The only thing that changes between his story and yours is whether you let the thread finish what it started. Before you go, which piece of this thread hit you the hardest? Was it the seed in Genesis, the wounds in Psalm 22, Bethlehem named 700 years early? Leave it in the comments, even one word. I read every one, especially from folks here in the US, and it genuinely shapes what we trace next. If this opens something up for you today, the most useful thing you can do is subscribe. Leave a comment, and share this with someone in your life who thinks the Old Testament is just ancient history sitting in a drawer somewhere. That's genuinely how this reaches the people who need it. We depend on you to spread it. Please keep us in your prayers. God bless you.